Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 5, Episode 3 of the Senstennial Podcast, a member of the Hockey Podcast Network. And this week, we're super excited to welcome on to the show, the fourth period's David Pagnotta. David, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm good. We're a little over a week from the regular season. How can't you be, right?
Oh, yeah, and definitely, I know Sens fans are pumped for puck drop, even more than last season, and that's kind of where we're gonna kick things off. So Ottawa had a busy off season this summer. When it came to trades and free agent signings, there were a lot to go around. Of course, they brought in guys like Kubalik, Tarasenko, MacEwen, and Korpisalo, and departed with players like DeBrincat, Talbot, and Watson. So, what did you like or not like about their moves this summer?
Overall, I like them. I like the addition of, you stabilize the goaltending position a little bit with Korpisalo in net, him and Forsberg kind of battling things out. So I like that add. Tarasenko, I think, was solid as well. You stabilize your top six, you add some secondary scoring because it's effectively where he is right now. And if he exceeds that, that's a bonus. You get a little toughness in there with MacEwen and help out some of the younger kids. And have that responsibility on the ice or on the bench. And if you need to throw them out there for certain situations and circumstances, you can. So look, overall, I like the moves that the Sens made. I think they're a team that's still on the up and up. Still going to take maybe another year or two before they really enter that legitimate status and contender status kind of realm. But with the pieces that they've got, with another year for Stützle, Jake Sanderson given an opportunity to gain more minutes this season. I really like their decor and how that's shaping up. I think this is a team that's trending upwards. And I'm interested to see not just how they compete, but where the compete level really is this season. Especially after they MacGyver their way through the salary cap situation, because they got a few other decisions they got to make.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there.
Yeah, thanks, David, again. I think many Sens fans would argue that the most significant addition this offseason came at the very top, and that was the finalization of the sale of the Ottawa Senators to Michael Andlauer. And he's already made a bit of a splash, bringing in Steve Staios as president of hockey ops and Sean Tierney as head of analytics to Ottawa's front office. What are your thoughts on these additions and on what it bodes for the direction that this new Sens ownership wants to take us in?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Andlauer is certainly familiar with the National Hockey League, having a piece of the Canadians for a while, and him and his group that came in there, they're excited. They want this team to compete. They want this to continue to grow. I think that was in the messaging right out of the gate, and the honesty that he's already translated to the fan base, and even inside that room, saying, "Hey, look, guys, you compete, we'll spend the money. Well, you keep competing, we'll keep spending the money." So it's a bit of a breath of fresh air in that respect. You get a new guy in there. The next steps, if essentially, will be the arena and what they decide to do and what direction they go in there. But to have that familiarity with the league overall, to have a guy that's been part of it, is I think and has been really important for the National Hockey League overall, and I think for this organization. He brings in people he's familiar with. Obviously, that happens in every situation. But Steve Staios is a strong hockey mind. He was a stable, strong player on the blue line, and he's going to add some stability to this club overall with the decisions that are going to be made. Now, one of the telling things, at least for now, was in his introductory press conference, or at least in his press statements, Andlauer had mentioned that with Staios and Pierre leading the management fold, we're confident in how the team's moving forward. So that, at least for me, leads me to believe that there is that confidence in the GM for now, and they'll see how things kind of go as this season plays out. They will have to make a decision on the future of DJ Smith eventually. I don't think it's going to come anytime soon, but we'll kind of see where that kind of goes. But the biggest thing this team needed was to stabilize not just the ownership group, but management in general. And it's a good sign that they were able to do that right when the season got going, or is getting going.
And it was definitely a long-winded process. And, from your perspective behind the scenes a little bit, were you able to, see the hoops that some of these ownership groups had to jump through? Like, was it getting super intense with what was being asked of them, or?
Well, I mean, look, we all know the celebrity angle that was
Yeah.
tied to a lot of these groups, right? With Ryan Reynolds and Snoop and everybody else, The Weeknd and everybody else that was kind of tied. There were others in play as well from a minority state perspective. I mean, look, it's not as easy trying to buy an NHL franchise as it is in some of the other lower tier leagues around the globe, in other sports. So I think, again, the biggest key from the National Hockey League's perspective was familiarity and stability, and they had that and have that in Andlauer's group. Would it have been cool to see, Reynolds and everything that he brings to the NHL? Absolutely. But they're confident in what they brought right now. So let's see how things kind of continue to unfold with them. Every league has their own rules, and every league has their own different processes they go through. I mean, if you want to try to buy an NFL team, it's night and day in comparison to the hoops. Yeah, you got to jump through there. So the league did their due diligence, and now let's see how the team performs, and let's see what happens behind the scenes. Because again, I mentioned the arena. There's a big play for that to happen, and I believe there are some kind of some stuff that are in the works there. So we'll see how that transpires and transitions over these next several months.
Yeah, I think the perspective that you've given is sort of the sentiment that the Sens fans have shared about the consistency and stability of Andlauer, and that he's going to be a great leader to sort of lead us into the next stage of Sens fandom. But obviously
it's also sorry, just to jump, it's also the messaging, right? To the fan base and the openness with the fan base. And that's a trend that we've seen since, I think it was the Rangers when they first came out and said, look, we're going to suck, but we're going to rebuild, and we just want to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And their rebuild took about 8 seconds because that's just how Jimmy Dolan works. But that notion and that appreciation, at least from the fans, to say, all right, look, at least we know what direction this team is going in. That's translated to other markets. The Canadians did it. The Leafs kind of did it. Philadelphia is doing it. San Jose is doing it. So at least you have that openness with your fan base. You're not BSing them. It's a totally different world now, especially with social media. So you have to have that openness with your fan base. And I think having that initially with Andlauer and his group, and I think is a big key in building trust with a fan base and foundational base that lacked it for so long, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it is refreshing to hear the messaging of open and honest communications. But speaking of open and honest communications, the elephant in the room right now is that Shane Pinto is not signed. And this weekend, Elliot Friedman reported that Pinto's camp and the Sens were very far apart on a deal that Ottawa wanted a 1-by-1. Pinto was sort of looking at a 2-by-2.5. And then Bruce Garriock, a local reporter here, recently stated that the Sens were looking at a 2-by-2.1. Are you able to sort of expand on what you may have heard?
The 2.5 times 2 range has been, or neighborhood, that's kind of been the range from the get-go. And obviously the Sens haven't been able to get there. I was a little surprised at the 1x1 with the, wink, wink, nudge, nudge handshake. We'll figure this out in January when you sign an extension. That doesn't fly all the time. And I don't see that working right now. Unless there's a dramatic change of heart and Pinto just says, to hell with this, let's just do it. I don't think that's what's being advised by Louis Gross, his agent, and their team. So it's not an easy situation to be in. It's not one that was impossible to forecast. So there's some head scratching around the league going, well, how did you not address this sooner? You're making these other changes and augmenting your roster in certain areas. Why didn't this come into play, and why the hardball with him versus other scenarios? So I get all of that, but I think you're looking at the $2.5 million range now. Does it drop in a little lower? Is it in between 2.1 and 2.5? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, they have to create cap space. Yeah. And that's why, you've heard Matthew Joseph's name out there for a while, and you've heard and starting to hear a little bit more about Eric Brandstrom and Arton Zub's name bouncing around every once in a while. They have to create some space to not only get Pinto signed, but if they want to keep Josh Bailey, and it sounds like the notion, at least coming into training camp, was to have that veteran presence in your bottom six. I mean, he might be that $1 million player, which is great, or 900 or whatever, and that gets you there. But you still have to create the space to bring in Pinto, and it's certainly tricky right now. They're not there, they're not close, and all the reporting in the last 48 hours is bang on, because I mean that's just the situation it is right now. So unless they're willing to move out money and compensate a team for taking it on, this could go a little bit longer than a lot of people anticipated.
Now, I am in the camp of not trading Eric Brandstrom, because I think Ottawa has more forward depth than they do defensive depth that could fill an NHL role right now. But what have you heard on the Eric Brandstrom front? I imagine he's not in the same situation as Joseph, because he's just got the 1-year deal at $2 million. So he's not a cap dump situation. So I'm just curious to hear what you've heard on that front.
Well, he's also controllable as well. He's an RFA next summer. So yeah, there's some arbitration ties to that, but at least you have some controllability there, and you can help dictate how that's going to go later on. Outside of the fact that his name's floating around, I mean, there's nothing definitive in terms of, anything happening right now, because the Sens aren't in that position. They're not there yet.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So, we know the price tag for Joseph to take on, just under $3 million for 3 years. It's been reported. We've reported it's a first round pick or a top tier prospect. Now, can that change to a second round pick and a really good Sure. All of those variables are in play. But I do know from a few teams around the league, they said, sure, give us a first round pick and then we'll talk. And obviously they're not doing that, not yet. Yeah. So there have been expanded discussions. There were some teams that talked about, okay, we'll take Pinto and Joseph from you. Let's make this a larger type deal. I know at least one team had those very serious discussions, and then it just kind of trailed off because Ottawa is at least still for now wanting to keep them. So we'll see kind of how this goes, whether it's Joseph or Brandstrom or both. They have to create some space here to bring these guys in if they want to make that happen.
And one last point I wanted to raise on this: it seems like both sides right now are amicable. Like, it's definitely staying professional, at least from what I've read. Pinto wants to stay with the Sens. The Sens want Pinto to stay with them as well. So I think that might at least help if the situation was kind of what you had earlier this summer, where Alex DeBrincat didn't really want to sign an extension, and Ottawa was, at least before the exit interviews, wanting to sign him to an extension. I think that's more difficult, right? And could maybe leave some room for resentment, but it seems like that's not the case, at least in this situation.
Well, I want to see how that message gets delivered later on this week after that $1 million offer.
Yeah.
Let's see where that goes. And you're right. This is totally he wants to stay. He wants to play for this team. So that's certainly a good sign. I'm just curious as to, and we don't know all the ins and outs of those discussions, but I'm not sure I would be overly happy if I'm looking for 2+ and all of a sudden they're like, listen, let's just sign for 1 year, $1 million, and we'll worry about the rest later. That doesn't fly so well. Because what if you're worrying about the rest later next summer and Pierre's not the GM anymore, hypothetically? Yeah. You could make that decision. So I get it from the player side of things and from the agent side of things. You're right. So far, it's been okay under the circumstances. But let's see how this week kind of plays out, because this could be very telling as to how that relationship either gets mended or strained further.
After the break, we'll talk about Lassi Thomson hitting the waiver wire and talk a little bit more about Matthew Joseph and the rumors surrounding him. And then we'll talk about some of Ottawa's, coaching management situation, and maybe see whether Dave thinks that the Sens can make the playoffs this year. So stay tuned. Hey, Sens fans, we're back with another week of football, and DraftKings Sportsbook is keeping us in on the NFL action with great offers every single game day. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Throw $5 down on any of this week's epic matchups to walk away an instant winner. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. So, Football's more fun when you're in on the action. Download the app now and sign up with code THPN. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. That's code THPN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino Resort, licensed partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Now, as I mentioned before the break, Ottawa recently lost their 2019 first-round pick to the waiver wire. They put Lassi Thomson on there yesterday, and he was claimed by the Anaheim Ducks. So, I mean, there were rumors that Ottawa had allegedly tried to include Lassi Thomson as a sweetener in a package to ship out Matthew Joseph, but it seems like there were no takers. And as you were mentioning before the break, it seems like the sweetener is going to have to be more than that. So, have you heard anything about Lassi Thomson and the potential trades that were out there, or maybe included in a package with Matthew Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, look, he was one of those guys that would have been included of, I mentioned before, like a second round pick and a prospect. That's kind of where he kind of fell into play. So it would have been Joseph the second and him, for example, or something kind of, to that effect. They have 2 firsts. They only have their 1 second. There's no third next year. So you had to be a little bit creative. So I don't think it got much further than that. I know there were teams that have spoken. Obviously, we know about Philly, being in the mix on a variety of different fronts. I believe Arizona has had some, or at least did have some discussions previously with respect to potentially making that happen. But the ask has, to my knowledge, been about the same. So, you lose Thompson to the Ducks. I mean, interesting ad by them, considering they're dealing with their own negotiations with Jamie Drysdale, who's a 10.2 CRFA, just like Pinto, so they're not eligible for offer sheets, and that's an ugly situation right now. With the Ducks in his camp, and also with Zegras. So, interesting move by them to at least cushion a few things, because I think, look, the Ducks are going to be a team that's going to be making some moves later on this season. So to bring in a kid like this, take a chance on him, see if he develops differently and better under your system, I think it was a solid move for Anaheim. And from Ottawa's perspective, one less guy you got to pay.
Very true. I mean, okay. I'll just because we're on the topic of trades, and trade speculation is always fun. This is something that has no weight to it, but someone just pitched it, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on it. So the other day, I read someone saying, "What if Ottawa decided to get crafty with their cap space and trade Josh Norris to the Anaheim Ducks for Trevor Zegras, and include something on Ottawa's side to get that done?" So that you're bringing in a high caliber young player, you solve your cap space, you sign Pinto, and you have a guy who's maybe not as injury prone. And yeah, you have to give up assets. But what would you think of something blockbuster like that, even if it has no merit?
I like the boldness of it, because I want to see. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we want to see, right? I think Norris is just under $8 million. I don't know if, and he's 24, 25. So I don't know if Anaheim wants to get into that just yet. Now, granted, it's not a contract that they've signed, and their talks with Zegras are in the 2 to 3 year range, which is more on the player's preference than anything. But less money, maybe they're spreading things out in Anaheim. I'm not sure. It's curious. I'm certainly intrigued by it. I'm not sure how Anaheim how overly receptive they would be to something like that. That's the vibe I get right away. But I like the creativity.
Totally fair.
And taking all of this into account, then we've talked a bit about players, coaching, management. What would you say is your biggest concern for this team heading into the season?
Um, overall, like I like their top six. I like the makeup of the blue line. For me, it's how's the bottom six going to respond, and how, or not just, excuse me, not respond. How are they going to contribute? Where are they going to be counted on the most, and how are they going to be counted on to contribute to help offset not just the offense but other situational play. So for me, it's more so because we know what they have, at least in the top four on the blue line, right? So you can manage those minutes a little bit. For me, I'm curious to see how the bottom six gets instilled into certain game situations and how they get exploited in the right ways in game situations. So I want to see how that depth and how that contribution comes for this club, because we know from top tier caliber teams and top tier contenders, you need to be able to have a responsible bottom six, especially a third line unit that can help chip in offensively as well. So I want to see how that's going to overall develop for Ottawa. The other one is you made a pretty good commitment to Joonas Korpisalo, and I like the addition of bringing him in with Forsberg there. But 5 years was for me a little bit aggressive, but let's see how he responds. He's not 30 yet. He's still a guy that had a solid run when he was traded from Columbus to LA last season. Especially in the regular season, he was solid and sound. Excuse me. So let's see how that kind of goes as well for the Sens.
And I think the interesting thing is they changed how they structured his contract compared to Matt Murray, right? Whereas Matt Murray, it was backloaded. With Korpisalo, they decided to more front load it, so that the last 2 years were easier to buy out or maybe get rid of to a team as like a cap dump. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
Learn your lessons.
Learn them now.
Yeah.
And, all things considered, goaltending, defense, our forward core, which I think is excellent.
No bias.
And then, no bias at all, none at all. And then coaching. Do you see Ottawa making the playoffs?
I think they'll be in contention for a wild card spot. I don't know if I want to put them there just yet, in terms of, definitively, yes, they're going to be a wild card team or top three in the division. I think there's some really good pieces here. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a team that for me is on the upswing. So another year for Tkachuk, another year for Stützle, another year for Sanderson. Give some of these other guys some, and then of course you've got, obviously Norris healthy and Batherson and so on. So let's see how all this kind of works out for this group. And again, for me, how does that bottom six contribute on a regular basis, on a top tier basis, when you're playing the Floridas and Tampas and Torontos and Bostons and so on a more consistent basis. Detroit improved. Buffalo has improved. This is probably the hardest division to play in. So I like what they've brought. And I think they're going to be playing meaningful games once we, flip the calendar over to 2024. And once we get closer to the trade deadline, I think they're going to be in that discussion. How far ahead? I'm not sure just yet. I still think they're realistically maybe a year away from being a definitive wildcard contender, but I think they're going to be playing some solid hockey down the stretch.
And one last thing I want to ask you before you go, DJ Smith, the fan base has very mixed opinions about him. Some people believe that, no coach will last through a rebuild into contention. Others think that, he's a player's coach. Obviously, Brady Tkachuk seems to have a really good bond with him. Do you think that DJ Smith can help the Sens, can be the coach to get them into the playoffs? Or do you think it'll take someone who's more of an experienced, maybe better tactician to help them take that next step?
Wait and see kind of mode. I think and this from an experience perspective, how do you gain experience? Well, you got to go through it, right? So learning process and same with players, the exact same thing. Well, you can't have a rookie goalie lead you in the playoffs. You need to have experience. How the hell do you get experience? Well, you play those games, right? Mm-hmm. So I think he's done a solid job with what he's been given. We know he's in a contract year. And I think that decision will be made after the fact. But I think he's done some right things and shown some strong technique that can keep this team together and keep them into that status. Now, if the wheels fall off and we're sitting here in February going, what happened? This team should be a lot better. Then we kind of know the answer. And sometimes it takes those types of experiences for coaches to evolve. It just may be in a different setting. So we'll have to wait and see. Like I said, I think this team should be playing meaningful games in the second half and around that March trade deadline. So if that's the case, then a lot of that also plays to the coaching style that him and his staff implement for this group.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Dave. That flew by. So really appreciate your time. And is there anything you want to mention before we end the show today?
I'm just looking forward to a new season. We'll be bouncing around. I'll be in Ottawa a few times this season, so definitely looking forward to some of those Sens games, and just for puck to drop in about a week. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we're definitely excited as well. So hopefully, it's like a couple nights sleep, and then it'll just magically be there. We'll get up, we'll be ready to go to the CTC and rock out there for the Sens. So thank you, Dave, for joining us, and have a good one, and go Sens go.
There you go. See you, boys. Thank you.
Thanks, David.